Hello, everyone. I'm Elizabeth Corey. I'm the founder of beatingtrauma.com, and we are here to talk about trauma today. I will warn you that there's some kind of like massive storm happening outside right at the moment. Even for Florida, it's a big one. So hopefully everything will be okay and I won't suddenly disappear on you guys, but we'll see how it goes. It should be okay. Florida is pretty prepared for these kind of things in general. We get a lot of storms this summer. So thank you guys for being here. I really appreciate it. Today I want to talk about something that's going to make all the controllers go, which is how we know when our mind is running our recovery. I've been thinking about this a lot lately because a lot of us are out there looking for solutions. We're doing everything we can to find a way to heal ourselves. And when we get started, we're going to largely use our mind to make our healing path for ourselves. We're going to use it to gather information and figure things out on an intellectual level. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. To some degree, we have to do that. That's pretty much mandatory. However, over time, the mind can grab hold of our recovery process and try to run with it. And it can become almost an entirely intellectual process for us. And when we speak about this from an inner parts perspective, we're talking about the controller, not surprisingly, will kind of take over recovery, make it all about intellectual learning and all of those types of things. And we'll struggle to get past a certain point. And it's something I see with myself, with all of my clients, with people who are on my Facebook page. I see it happening. Everybody is going to spend some time in this place, either at the beginning of their recovery or even intermittently as they continue to heal themselves. Okay. Now, your controller is not going to want to hear this today because they think they're doing a pretty good job of keeping you away from what they consider the really dangerous stuff, which is your emotions and grounding into your body. And they're keeping you away from that by making sure this process remains an intellectual one. And that to them feels safe enough. I mean, don't get me wrong. A lot of people never even go down this road at all because of the danger of, according to the controller, the danger of what they might find. But if you have taken a step to go down this road, kudos to you, because that in and of itself is not easy. But when we can see that we've got a pretty strong mind-based process happening, it can help us to take steps to get just a little bit deeper in our recovery by being able to see that that's in place. And many spiritual texts will talk about this as the observer self, right? The self who watches what's happening in the mind, watches what's happening when we have flashback emotions. That's the aspect of self we actually want to be running our recovery, but that takes a lot of work and a lot of effort to get ourselves there. So I will put that out there as well. So today I want to talk a little bit about what are some of the signs that we are operating our recovery from the mind. And these can be things to look out for as we continue our journey. And honestly, it's something that I personally think does not get talked about enough. Because I'll be honest, a lot of people out there right now in the world guiding people in recovery, writing books, doing videos, having all of their websites out there are operating from the mind. So it's like the mind people are talking to the mind people. And so we're not really getting that perspective about bringing ourselves down into the body, grounding, looking at our emotions, and stepping out of the mind. Don't get me wrong. There are people doing that. But it's just, in my personal opinion, not enough people doing that. So we want to take a good hard look at how we may be keeping it a bit intellectual in our recovery journey. And I'm going to give you some signs, as I usually do, because if we don't know what's going on, we're not going to be able to do anything about it. So knowing that is happening is critical to making a change there. So here's my first sign. Reading all the books and watching all the videos. Now, don't forget, listening to all the podcasts. Now, I am not saying there isn't a time and a place to read the books and listen to the podcast and watch the videos. However, typically when the mind is in charge of our recovery, that will be all that we do. Like, we will consume information as much as possible. So when we see ourselves going from one book to another, one podcast to another, one video to another, those are moments to say, how am I keeping this engagement at the mind level? Like, how am I focusing my attention only there, right? We want to take a look at that. As I said, there's nothing wrong with reading the books and listening to the podcast, but has it taken over our whole recovery process? Is there nothing left for really connecting with self? This is something we want to be asking ourselves. And it's really important to do that, because the controller will never create a distraction for you that isn't actually valid. And what I mean by that is the controller will always have lots of good reasons for what they choose to distract you from connecting with self. It will never be something that you can see is silly or stupid. The controller would never do that. They will always pick things that are highly valid, highly justified, really do go along with where your interests lie, because they know, the controller knows better than anyone what those interests are. They are a part of you. So you're never going to be sent down, a direction that doesn't make sense. If you're in recovery, they're going to occupy your mind with lots and lots of recovery and healing types of resources, okay? Again, there is a place for that, but it can become completely overwhelming and even obsessive when the controller wants to distract us from self using those things. So that's the first way in which the mind can be in charge of recovery. The next way I'm referring to it here is jumping through the rabbit holes, or jumping into the rabbit holes. And you may not have heard of this term, the rabbit holes. It's something I use with my clients a lot. It's a reference to like Alice in Wonderland. But the idea here is we become obsessed with a certain concept. And we're all over the internet, right? We're looking at every single website that's available. We're looking at everything we can find about that particular topic. Again, this can lead us down. The rabbit hole can include doing things like reading all the books, watching all the videos, listening to all the podcasts. But the rabbit hole often happens around more specific topics, right? So something that's much more specific in nature. And we can get so caught up in it, and it can take our attention away from anything else, including what's happening emotionally or in the body, or both, for us. So something to be looking for. Do you have certain rabbit hole topics? And by the way, these don't have to be recovery related. I'm focusing specifically today on recovery related topics, but rabbit holes can be so many things, anything. I have a long-term client who really knows herself well, and one day I called her and she says, well, I've spent like the last 6 hours researching Mount Everest and those who climb it, so you can probably guess what part I'm in. And I was like, yeah, actually, I can. These are the rabbit holes, right? When we're going down the rabbit holes, there is a good chance that for us, we're trying to avoid some kind of feeling or some kind of way that we are maybe trying to catch on to our own memories, and we're staying away from that. We're staying away from that with the rabbit holes. So here's the thing. We live in a world today that was largely controller created. And by that, I mean the macro controller, where everybody's controllers get together and create our environment, or a system in our environment. So that macro controller has created lots and lots and lots and lots of ways for us to distract ourselves with all the resources that are out there. I mean, more so than any other time in human existence, we have so many options for staying away from ourselves, even in recovery. So this is something that we really want to keep in mind, is how are we being brought down those rabbit holes, brought into a state of really intellectually examining our recovery instead of grounding into self and figuring out what's going on there. The next one I want to talk about is defining all the words. This is something that could get a little bit heated, and I've seen some discussion on my page over the years around words that are acceptable to use in recovery and words that are not acceptable to use in recovery. When we start evaluating down to the individual word and saying this word doesn't work and here's why this word doesn't work, but this word does work and here's why this word does, and getting in arguments on social media about what is the best word to use to describe something, standing by the more intellectual side of ourselves. We're really in that place where the controller's in charge. And I hear this all the time. The truth is, some people don't like the word survivor. Some people don't like the word victim. Some people would rather see the word abuser. Some people would rather see people who abused us. There are so many different ways that we can look at words in regards to recovery and say, this is the best word. But honestly, the truth is everybody's on an individual journey. And some people are going to like certain words, and some people are going to like others. And I've learned that when we start getting caught up in those little details of how we're communicating with each other, we are in that controller space. We're in the mind. The mind is intellectualizing our recovery, and they're doing it at a very, very detailed level. It is in and of itself a bit of a rabbit hole, right? But it's something to look out for. Everybody's got their words. Everybody's got the words that work for them. And I would suggest that when you see somebody using a word that doesn't work for you, let's translate it in your mind. That's acceptable and move on, right? But that's not what the controller wants to do. The controller wants to go, hey, wait, you're using the wrong word. Let's fight about it. I don't engage in such fights, but I will say there's a lot of that intellectualization going on out there. So it's good to notice that. Am I jumping down a rabbit hole here with this word usage and what I want it to be? So I'm going to save the best one for last. And I'm going to talk next. This isn't quite the best one yet, in my opinion, but the best one's Kevin. The next one is when we are asking why. Okay, now this is a hard one because we are always going to have parts, and not just the controller, that want to understand why. As a matter of fact, another big part that asks why is going to be that karma kid part, because they often will journey down the road of self-blame. But when we start asking why things are happening, why are we on this journey? Maybe we're like, why were we born into this particular life? Why have we been treated this way? We're asking questions we can't answer. There's actually no way to answer that question, I believe, while we're in human form, other than to really look at it at a more general psychological perspective, where we're seeing how trauma is passed down through generations. We could certainly do things like that. However, that's not really the why I'm talking about. The why I'm talking about is why is this happening to me? Why did I deserve this? Which you didn't, right? Those why questions have a tendency to be an intellectualization process. Even things like, let's say you're feeling some grief. The number one way we pull ourselves out of our grief is to ask why we're feeling it. It works a lot of the times. So keep watching for how you might do that when you start to feel an emotion and suddenly you can hear that part in there, controller, going, why would we feel this? What is this for? What is it related to? Why does it exist? Is it valid? That is your controller intellectualizing your emotion, and in the process pulling you back up into the head and out of how the body is feeling. So that's more acute version of the intellectualization. I'm talking today more about it at a bigger picture, like how we can be really in an intellectual recovery in general, but that also exists on a daily basis with individual experiences as well. And being able to see that is very, very powerful. My controller will always try to intellectualize my grief when I go into my grief. My controller is terrified of my grief. They do not want to feel it. And they will very quickly start going, why is this here? Does it make sense? Should it be here? Immediately, as soon as I start to connect. So my job is, of course, quit that line of thinking and move into the body as much as I can. Now, is that easy? No. Might be able to do it for a minute or two at a time, but the more you notice the intellectualization, the better chance you have of staying in the body when you're feeling emotions. So, the last one is one of the biggest. It is almost always a sign, excuse me with my throat, it is almost always a sign that the controller is in charge. And that is the judging and comparing. Now, most of the other things we're doing when we're intellectualizing will also have an element of judging and comparing. But some of the examples I have here, which, by the way, I've done all of these things at different points in my own recovery, are judging the healing approach of others. Maybe you don't think their approach is as good as your approach, right? Judging others who are not on the healing journey, right? Oh my gosh, they're like just not seeing anything. They're not awake. They're like so behind, and that kind of judging. But it keeps going, right? Judging self because we're not healing enough. Okay. So it's not just judging others. A lot of it is judging self. And I'll be honest that most of the time when we're judging others, it's a mirror to how we're judging self. So it's important to recognize that too, as okay, like if I'm judging others, there's probably some pretty strong judgment coming down on me internally inside my own system. I will say that when it comes to my clients and myself, one of the biggest things we hear from the controller is, you're not healing fast enough, right? That's the controller talking to us. You are stuck. This isn't working. You might as well give up, right? So this is a big controller message that comes out because mostly they're scared. The controller actually lives with a tremendous amount of fear under the system. So what we are oftentimes hearing when we're hearing this judgment, especially of self, is actually fear-based. So it's coming from a place of fear and it's saying, I don't like where this is going, so I'm going to tell you it's not working and we're going to stop, right? Like that's the messaging that's actually going on when the controller is judging our journey, right? And then the last one for this section is trying to figure out where you are compared to others. I hear this a lot. I've done this myself. They've done this much work. Where am I in comparison to them? Am I like ahead of them? Am I behind them? And the truth is, there is almost no way we're going to be able to answer that question. And of course, it doesn't actually matter. But if the controller can get you wrapped around in your head around this idea of, okay, like, where am I compared to this other person? It can be another intellectual distraction. It can keep you up in your head, right? And this is something to watch for. It's something to notice. This is the kind of thing that happens to us a lot when we are on this journey. So judging and comparing is always going to be a sign that you're in your controller. It's also going to be really hard to stop because the truth is, our controllers have been judging and comparing for most of our lives. It's not just a thing we do in healing and recovery work. It's a thing we do in all aspects of our life, and society pushes us to do that. Our entire school system is based around the idea of comparison, right? Where do you rank compared to everybody else? So we know at least from the time we entered kindergarten, we were experiencing ranking and comparing on a regular basis, right? And more than likely, when we come from families who are dysfunctional at best, abusive at worst, they will often use judging, comparing, ranking as a way of managing the relationships within the family. So this is something we've experienced a very long time. And to the controller, it is a very natural way of living in the world. But we do have to bring some awareness to it and recognize it as a way of keeping the mind busy, and that it is actually not providing us any significant value when it comes to our actual healing journey. And I'm terribly sorry about my throat today. I thought it was doing better than this. My throat has a tendency to become a problem when I'm talking about really important stuff, which this live stream is about really important stuff. So in a sense, it's not that weird, to be honest. So now you probably already know the answer to this next thing I'm going to ask, which is what do we do instead, right? Like, okay, so we're not supposed to be intellectual. We're not supposed to be jumping down these rabbit holes and comparing and defining and asking why and intellectualizing our whole healing process. Fine. What are we supposed to do, right? And that is such a good question that you're asking. I'm glad you asked it. Because our job is to work on following our emotions, okay? If you are on this journey, you already know that there are emotions there because they're coming through. Because honestly, the truth is, if you were not having emotional responses to the world around you, you wouldn't be listening to me, because if the controller could contain all of our emotions, we wouldn't do this, because this is hard and this is not fun at all. The controller's whole goal is to contain the emotions for our entire lifetimes, so we never have to address it or feel it. So if you're on this journey, you have some emotions, right? So you already have a place to start, right? In what I'm talking about here of following our emotions. So our job is to start hearing out what those emotions have to say, writing from those emotions, because that begins for us the grounding process, allowing us to get more and more in touch with what's going on in self, right? What our parts are saying. That is really what matters when it comes to the healing journey. If you never read another book as long as you lived, but you were connecting with your emotions and how you emotionally felt and hearing what those emotions have to tell you, you would be doing some really amazing work. Amazing work. That does require us to get back in the body, which to the controller feels like the worst possible thing we could ever do. Okay, so it's important to recognize that we are going to have a tremendous amount of resistance to healing through our emotions and letting those emotions guide us. That's going to be really, really difficult, because the controller is like, nope, and they will resist it. They will put up a big fight. They will throw defenses and distractions and intellectualization at you to try to avoid this process. But the more you can come back to the emotions and what they say, the better. So this is what I have for you today. I hope you can use this to help you in your own journey, to see maybe some places where you might be intellectualizing a little bit more than you want to be. And you can bring your journey back to self and out of all of those processes where we are thinking and making our journey about mind and the intellectual discovery process. So I thank you all for being here. Thank you for listening. The topic is really hard for us to hear, because the controller will come up and be like, nope, we're not going to listen to that, obviously, because if you know what the controller is doing, you can stop what the controller is doing. So they don't want you to know. So recognizing this is important. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening, despite what I'm sure was quite a bit of inner resistance and maybe even distraction while I was speaking, and that's normal too. And I will plan to talk to you guys next Tuesday. Thank you all so much, and I will see you then. Bye.